revenant de la jolie Rochelle, mon revenant de la jolie Rochelle.
On the northern shores of Minnesota lies a remote waterscape steeped in history, nature, and tradition. Named for the wild men who paddled its waterways in the Canadian fur trade, Voyageurs National Park is home to nestling bald eagles, moose, gray wolves, black bears, loons, owls, otters, beavers, and a vast array of other wildlife. Most of its hidden waterways remain untouched, and pristine boreal forests cover the landscape, where on a cloudless pre-dawn morning, under the northern lights, you can almost hear the echo of the songs sung by fur traders traveling in their massive canoes. Celebrated as legendary heroes in song and story, the voyageurs reached an almost celebrity status, but their existence in the remote northern wilderness was not as glamorous as most folk tales lead people to believe. Traveling from sunrise to sunset along a 3,000-mile waterway from Montreal to Lake Athabasca, the Voyageurs Highway tells of an epic journey repeated annually over the span of decades. I'm Jason Epperson, and this week on Parkography, the legendary wild and hardy voyageur and the waterways of the Great North. They traveled for nearly 200 years. More in a moment, but first, this episode is sponsored by Slinky Stove. Slinky Stove is the patented collapsible fire pit that stays intact when packed. It's perfect for RVs and car camping or in your own backyard. It sets up in seconds, providing you with smokeless airflow rings and a clean burning fire. No more dancing around campfire smoke. Inexpensive and packed with extras, the Slinky Stove offers a 3-level cooking system that gives you flexibility, whether it's morning coffee or evening campfire chili. And with contained ash, cleanup's quick, just the way it should be on public lands. Order yours now at slinkystove.com or click the link in the description. When French explorer Jacques Cartier embarked on the first of his 3 voyages into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, where the Great Lakes connect to the Atlantic Ocean, he also laid the groundwork for decades of trading practices across the Great Lakes region. Focused primarily on furs used as trimming and adornment, he would overlook the beaver pelts that would soon become fashionable in Europe. But soon fishermen on the Great Banks of the North Atlantic were focused on the highly sought-after robes. They would trade metal items with indigenous people to fuel the European desire for hats made of beaver pelt felt during the second half of the 16th century, and thus fishermen became fur traders. But as the demand for fur from North America peaked in the second half of the 17th century, traders recognized the need to develop routes further into the eastern Great Lakes region and beyond. Trade had already been established with the indigenous people in the area, but when French traders Pierre Esprit Radisson and Médard Chouart de Groseillies ventured into the country north and west of Lake Superior, the land proved lucrative. However, the furs they collected throughout their journey were confiscated by French officials upon their return, which led to the establishment of the Hudson Bay Company. Founded in 1670, the Hudson Bay Company would become a major British-funded player in the fur trade through the establishment of trading posts along the shores of its namesake bay. Now in competition with the British for trade with native groups, the French set out to explore and claim additional portions of the upper Great Lakes region, leading to the continual expansion north and west of Lake Superior. Nearly 100 years after the founding of the Hudson Bay Company, the Northwest Company was formed to explore these territories and engage the indigenous people in trade. The challenges for the Northwest Company were numerous, most notably the reality that their routes were impassable by ship. To combat this, they made plans to set out brigades of canoes, and they hired men called voyageurs to paddle along the waterways of New France. Voyageur is a French word meaning traveler, of course. The voyageurs would journey throughout the interconnected waterways, carrying trade goods to exchange for not just beaver pelts, but also hides of muskrat, deer, moose, and bear. Most voyageurs were French-Canadian, recruited before marriage from the villages and towns along the route. To make room for their cargo, many were of shorter stature, often 5'4" or less. Many voyageurs developed their own distinct styles, but the standard attire consisted of a pair of trousers, a shirt, and a hooded coat for cold weather, accompanied by a red or blue cap and a colorful sash tied around the waist. It also wasn't uncommon for the travelers to adopt native styles of clothing, varying based on who they interacted with. The spring brigades of canoes that left Montreal on May 1st were usually the maître canoe or the master's canoe, typically made from the bark of large paper birch trees, which was then stretched over a frame of white cedar. The canoes stretched 36 feet long and weighed some 600 pounds, making them large enough to carry 4 tons of crew and cargo. Crews of the master's canoe ranged from 6 to 12 members, but 8 to 10 was the average, and consisted of a bowman who steered from the front and led the crew, a steersman who stood in the rear taking the bowman's commands, and 8 middlemen, all paddling in unison. Other versions of the canoe, smaller in size, were also used in areas west of Lake Superior. Named the Northern Canoe, they were about 25 feet long and weighed roughly 300 pounds, only able to carry half or less of the cargo of the larger version. It was outfitted with a crew of 4 to 8 with an average of 5 to 6, and it could be carried upright by 2 men. This was oftentimes beneficial, as it wasn't just easy travel across calm waters for the voyageur. At 120 different points along the route, the canoes could not pass due to land obstructions, shallow water, or dangerous rapids, which forced the travelers to unload the canoes and carry them, along with the 90-pound bundles of fur, down the trail. A process called a portage, or as we Americans would say, portage. To speed up the process, they would wear a leather sling across their forehead, attaching the first bundle to it so it hung low on their backs. A second bundle, sometimes more, was placed on top, and the voyageurs walked hunched over to their destination before returning for additional bundles, often covering 100 miles in a 14-hour day with a 10-minute rest every hour, during which they would smoke a pipe. Thus, distances became measured in pipes, with a 3-pipe lake equal to 3 hours of travel. Near continuous movement left no time to hunt, gather, or fish, so they carried their food with them and resupplied along the route through trade, carrying enough to sustain the requirement of 5,000 calories a day per person. They'd typically eat 2 meals composed of food high in calories and unlikely to spoil, with staples including pemmican, a dried pounded buffalo or caribou meat mixed with fat. Dried peas, beans, sea biscuit, and salt pork, along with maize and wild rice, were also often consumed, depending on the area in which the voyageurs traveled. Often viewed as wild, mannerless men who ate food from their pockets and kept black flies and mosquitoes at bay with their long hair and anointments made from bear grease and skunk urine, they were, in reality, loud, jolly men. They were gamblers, fighters, and drinkers, but also musicians, with their songs echoing along the waterways to keep rowers in unison. When their day of paddling ended at between 8 and 10 in the evening, they would enjoy a second meal, make repairs to equipment, prepare breakfast, and then tell stories or sing again until it was time to sleep. They, in the midst of the wilderness, created a way of life. Shelter was more often than not an overturned canoe with a bed of moss and a blanket of furs. A smoky fire would keep bugs away, and they would only erect a simple tarp tent if the weather was bad enough to permit it. A few hours of sleep came before a 3 a.m. start to do it all over again, paddling for 3 hours before stopping for breakfast. In all, the route from Montreal to Lake Superior and back took 12 to 16 weeks. Drowning was common, and broken limbs, twisted spines, hernias, and rheumatism were often the fate of many voyageurs. The smoky nighttime fires caused respiratory, sinus, and eye problems, and most would never make enough to consider an early retirement from the grueling lifestyle, working from age 22 until they were in their 60s. Some would return to their homes in Montreal during the winter months, although most would never marry. Others stayed in the backcountry to transport fur to distant French outposts despite the cold. Up until the decline of fur trading in the late 1870s, the voyageurs were viewed as blue-collar workers, numbering as many as 3,000 at the height of their profession in the 1810s. By the mid-19th century, the Hudson Bay Company had merged with the Northwest Company, ruling an island empire that stretched from the bay to the Pacific. After England gained control of Canada, and as the mounted police began to extend formal government into fur trading areas, life quickly changed. The demand for fur and pelts was soon overwhelmed by the desire for products like silk, and with the introduction of railways and steamships on the horizon, the voyageur grew obsolete. Little written evidence from the men who made the trek remains, but one old voyageur, well into his 70s, was reported to have reminisced of his time in the wilderness. "I could carry, paddle, walk, and sing with any man I ever saw," he said. "I have been 24 years a canoeman, and 41 years in service. No portage was ever too long for me. 50 songs could I sing. I have saved the lives of 10 voyageurs, have had 12 wives and 6 running dogs. I spent all my money in pleasure. Were I young again, I would spend my life the same way over. There is no life so happy as a voyageur's life." The American National Park, named for these famous travelers, is a place of interconnected waterways that flow west and eventually north as part of the Arctic watershed of Hudson Bay. It's also a place of transition between land and aquatic ecosystems, between southern boreal and northern hardwood forests, and between wild and developed areas. It's here in the heart of the continent that a unique landscape formed by ancient earthquakes, volcanoes, and glaciers still remains, with exploded rock half the age of the Earth encrusting the shorelines. Voyageurs National Park was established in 1975, but it's filled with evidence of over 10,000 years of human life and use, including traces of Native Americans, the fur traders, and homesteaders alike. As park visitors travel the lakes today, it's easy to imagine the voyageur of the past, dipping their canoe paddles into the clear, dark waters to the rhythm of their songs, gliding past the rock and pines of this northern landscape. The park shares its northern border with Canada and lies just west of the Boundary Water Canoe Area Wilderness. Park visitor centers are accessible by car, but in order to truly experience the park, one must leave their vehicle behind and explore by boat. A wide range of daily boat tours are offered by the Park Service, but houseboating and self-guided tours are also popular. The only in-park concession-operated lodging can be found at the Kettle Falls Hotel, but RV camping is available from nearby commercial campgrounds, many of which also offer boat rentals. Open year-round, the warm summer months make Voyageurs a popular destination for water lovers, and the park transforms into a world of white during the winter. While frozen lake surfaces provide access to people on snowmobiles, the trails through the forest create perfect conditions for exploration on snowshoes or cross-country skis. And the Rainy Lake Visitor Center is typically open during the winter with limited hours. That's it for this episode of Parkography. Thanks so much for being here. If you got something out of this episode, please share it with your friends, and we'll see you next time.